In this episode, I get to sit down with Marek Rudak, a former Army Ranger and executive coach, and we get to share our greatest lessons learned, helping you lead your families and your parishes like never before. So, all that and more coming up next. All right, Marek, welcome to the Catholic Link Show.
Well, thank you for having me here. My pleasure.
For our listeners, man, I'm super excited for today's talk. We have Marek Rudak on here that I'm going to introduce in a second, but we're going to be talking about Catholic leadership, and we have, I think, a lot of lessons to learn from Army Ranger and a fighter pilot sitting down here, and how we can apply that to our families and to our faith. So, Mark was a West Point graduate. Was part of the 82nd Airborne deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan as an Army Ranger, and now is out doing business consulting and coaching that I'm really excited to hear about. And he has a book called The Love Driven Man that I'll leave a link in the description as well. And so, yeah, Mark, could you tell us a little bit of just kind of about your background and about your military background, but also your faith background and how you came to be right here?
Yeah. So it's kind of a dangerous question because like with me, everything is a long story. So let me try to like kind of make the long story short. Yeah. So kind of to kind of weave both in. So I was actually born in Poland. That's where my name and accent comes from. And when I was born, it was like in 80s. During time of communism. So back then, like Catholicism was very strong. So I got a lot of religious background, if you will. Things like I mean, ever since I remember, I always went to some kind of like a religious class in Poland. So I definitely had the knowledge piece, but
Mm.
I never really had the emotional connection to my faith. In other words, we kind of like did what we did. We went to church, but we never like talked about what happened at church. We never like talked about faith. And another thing that really derailed my faith for quite some time was the fact that I grew up in an abusive family. My dad didn't live with us. My father figure was my grandfather, who was very abusive, not physically but verbally. He's the kind of person that would always know exact things to say to make you feel like crap. And so like the first 14 years of my life living in that house, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. And to me, um, I didn't believe in God just because I think it's very fair to say that a lot of times our impression of God, especially for us men, is our father figures. And so because of my father figure was very toxic, I I had this almost like a virus inside of me that felt like, hey, I'm not smart enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not confident enough. And so because of that, I turned to the world for external validation. And so the kind of the thing with me is that I always did very well in school. So like I really focused on getting good grades, especially when I moved to the United States. I was like, hey, this is a huge opportunity for me to prove myself. And so like I mean, I hate to say it, but hindsight 2020, I would have done the same thing all over again. I still would have went to West Point. But to be completely honest with you, the main reason why I went to West Point was because I saw all these confident people in the movies wearing uniform, everybody looking up to them, and I was like, man, I want that, I want that. And so that was really my thing. I mean, I was 17. I'm like, what did I know? I thought it's
Yeah.
like, hey, if I go to West Point, have this uniform, I finally feel that confidence. But the thing about it is that if you're looking for the confidence on the external, it's never gonna be enough. So like for a period of time, there were always things to kind of look up to. Same thing at Air Force. You get ranked top to bottom every single
Mhm.
semester. So I did very well. I graduated top 10% of my class. There was Ranger School. There was like Iraq and Afghanistan. It was always that kind of like a chase of accomplishments. And that the problem with that is that eventually you run out of those accomplishments. And so for me, like the way that manifested for myself was my marriage. I mean, it's just I hate to say it, like when I was an infantry officer, so I always made fun of privates getting the justice of the peace marriage before going to Iraq and Afghanistan. But guess what I did? I did exactly the same thing. I rushed into marriage. I mean, to be fair, I had the right intentions, but I just didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
just lost my mom at the time. I was about to go to Afghanistan, and I just felt incredibly lonely. And I married for all the wrong reasons. And it was just a matter of time till that marriage blew up. So much so that when I worked at ExxonMobil, believe it or not, I prefer to go on these business trips where I would work on these work on these barges, working on these big facilities, doing these big projects, sharing a room with four older dudes. To me, that was more comfortable because when I went home, I felt like a failure. I just didn't have the skills to be able to relate to my wife. Why? Because I never experienced that at home. And so,
Mhm.
like in my case, it was the divorce, a very nasty divorce that really shook me up and woke me up, because I felt it's like, hey, I've accomplished all these things, and by the way, my ex-wife cheated on me, and it was, it nearly killed me. I mean, comparing to Iraq and Afghanistan, getting cheated on
Yeah.
was by far the toughest experience of my life, and that really shook me. I came this close to committing suicide, and as painful as it was exactly what I needed to like wake me up, and that started that gradual walk back to Christ, in a sense that all these intellectual things that I memorized and got an A for in Poland, later on in Catholic high school, all of a sudden started making sense for me. And so that was the faith, kind of like the faith journey. But from like the leadership perspective, the kind of the, how can I say, like, funny thing is that I got top notch leadership uh, education between West Point and Ranger School, and I did okay. But the problem with it is, because of that insecurity, I never showed up as fully myself. I kind of led from the point of fear instead of the point of love. And so, like, I did okay, but I missed all these opportunities to like really connect with my soldiers, to really like build that trust and that
Mhm.
emotional intelligence, if you will, that like now now all these years later I finally got, and thank God that I got it. But it just kind of, looking back and knowing what I know now, it's like it's almost like a computer. I did all the things right by the checklist, but I missed
Yep.
the opportunity to emotionally connect. And yes, I did okay, but like knowing what I know now, I'd be like, oh man, I could have all these damn things that not only would have helped to accomplish the mission better, but also like give myself and my soldiers a better experience.
Mhm. Yeah, man, there's so much to unpack there. I'm excited to kind of pull on this thread
Mm,
and see what unravels. So maybe we can start with just the some of the individual things that you said about uh, yeah, feeling, that insecurity or feeling inadequate, because I think, as men, we're taught from young ages in sports and other things to not show weakness, and, that emotions are kinda not okay, and I know, I've struggled with that a lot in trying to unlock that, and part of that is comes with the, this wound of inadequacy
mhm.
in young men. We're always trying to prove ourselves, we're trying to get that next thing in the checklist, that next, yeah, accomplishment that can make us feel more like a man. So what are some things that, since, kind of this breakdown and this buildup, and maybe in part of the faith that you've found, uh that has helped in your life and your leadership when it comes to, uh that feeling of identity or adequacy?
Yeah, sure. So there's definitely a lot of different things that help. So it's kind of like hard to like isolate particular ones, but like let me just kind of like maybe mention some of the big hitters, or maybe some of the things that people haven't really thought about. So obviously, aside from things like growing faith, prayer life, things like that, that goes without saying. But I think like one opportunity that men miss, and especially, and even leaders, because I'm super blessed to work with people at companies like Google, Salesforce. Recently, I got a client from NBA, not the basketball player, but the people that work in NBA. I'm about to coach somebody at UNICEF. So I mean, I really get, I'm really blessed to be able to work with leaders all across the spectrum. And like one thing that I just feel like is often missed is self-awareness. 'Cause that's kind of like really where
Mm,
the emotional intelligence comes into play. It's like, at the personal level, it's self-awareness and self-management. And
yeah.
one thing that really helped me along the way is journaling. Being able to like put things on paper, for many different reasons. One of them is that, there's this saying that if you can name it, you can tame it. So just like you like writing down piece of paper, it's not that it solves the problem, because especially we as men, we're so focused on solving the problem. I'm not saying that's not important, but a lot of times, in order for you to solve the problem, you have to solve the problem. You have to like put yourself in the right mindset to be able to solve the problem. I think Einstein said that, hey, you cannot solve the problem with the same mindset that create when you created that problem.
Yeah.
And so, like, where the journaling is very helpful. It's like it's almost like you get an opportunity to get to know yourself. And it sounds really ironic because it's like, hey, you are you. It's like, you should know yourself. But the problem is that, especially, I'm sure you can relate to it, is that, especially like we as men, we go to school, we get good grades in certain classes that tends to like dictate our major, that tends to dictate our job. And not that there's anything wrong with that per se, but the thing is that, what happens if we just keep always focusing on what other people say and pleasing other people, then in the process we don't really get tonight an opportunity to get to know ourselves and to connect with ourselves. So the nice thing about journaling is that gives you that opportunity to let go of things, develop that self-awareness, and be in a better position to figure out, not only how you can lead better, but also from the faith perspective, being able to shift from pointing the finger at other people, which is a very human thing to
Mhm.
do, to saying is like, hey, like when I get angry at this person, what does it really say about me? and
Yeah.
praying about it, bringing it to confession. But also when it comes to leadership, is focusing on what you can control versus shifting the blame to other people, because again, that's a very human thing to do. Why? Because if we point at ourselves, that puts the onus on us to change, and we as human beings, we don't like that. And so like the journaling gives you that awareness, and also that confidence that, hey, I can do this, I can take these baby steps, and I see the growth. And because of that, I developed this confidence that, hey, I can do a lot more than what my mind right now says. So I would say journaling is a big one. Another thing that kind of like really goes along with this, especially when it comes to our Catholic faith, is adoration. We
Mhm.
as men, we focus a lot on doing, and I think that's kind of like the danger of our faith, is that there's a lot of rules, if you will, and none that there's necessarily wrong with that, but it's like we can get so focused on the rules that
Mhm.
we don't really take a step back to focus on what these rules are about, which is really your connection with God. And so the nice thing about adoration is that you can go in there and it forces you to be quiet. Why? Because if you if you start talking or looking at your cell phone, you're gonna look really, really awkward. And so so like I really encourage, especially men, to take the time to go to adoration and start with this very simple prayer, which is like, "Speak, Lord, your servant's listening," and
Mhm.
have that reflection time, that time with Jesus. And to me, that was really valuable, to be able to sit with myself, because that's a lot of times what happens is that we are not comfortable sitting with ourselves, and so that's why we turn to alcohol, pornography, or even like overworking. Might not necessarily be like a bad thing, or it could be like even like working out too much. Some
Mhm.
things might not necessarily be too bad, but the problem is that if you don't spend that time with ourselves, it's very hard to get to know ourselves. And there's a saying that,
Yeah.
hey, if you don't know who you're making the choice for, it's very hard to make the right choice.
Mhm. Yeah. Man, there's so much good to unpack in there. I find it funny. I don't know if you have this experience where you're, things learning about in leadership or even in our culture of there are things that got popular like mindfulness
Hmm.
and there's there's goodness in there, but the reason why I laughed is because the Catholic Church has been doing this for 2,000 years. So it's these things that are inherently good that follow the natural law that is totally baked into our faith. And so I guess the more that I often learn about leadership, the more that it kind of ties me or brings me back into the beauty and the goodness of the faith, not only from a connection to God standpoint, but also just from the natural level of it's good for us to pray, to have introspection, to think and write and journal. I always recommend that for the men in my men's group of just writing it down and just holding yourself accountable, but also just having that introspection. I don't, do you find I know that there are some young priests that listen to this and young fathers
Hmm.
and families. Um, do you find that it's important for leaders to get feedback as well? And if so, like
Oh,
how
yeah,
does
yeah,
someone
yeah.
receive honest feedback to
Hmm.
be able to change? Because I think a lot of things, yeah, you can look and be like, okay, I was a
Hmm.
jerk at that
Yeah.
point, but some things you just have blind spots to, and you're
Hmm.
doing the best you can, and you don't really know what effect that has on people. So
Yeah,
how
yeah,
do
yeah.
how do people get good feedback?
Yeah, so obviously, like journaling is like one thing. It's like internal feedback, but here's
Mhm.
one thing that our feedback is super super helpful. It's like one of the topics that comes up a lot of my coaching sessions. So here's the thing about feedback is that when you ask an average person, give me feedback, it feels very overwhelming because it's like, oh, it's like, where do I start? Especially like if you ask your directs, yeah, for feedback, because it's like, oh, is this a tricky question? Is this going to be like my last statement as an employee?
Yeah.
So what I find helpful is just to make it super simple and ask two questions. And so the first question is like, hey, in the last month, 2 weeks, whatever the time period is, and you can actually do it with your spouse, even if your family. What is the one thing that I've done that was most helpful to you, or that gave you the most value, or give the organization
Mhm.
most value, or you found most helpful for as a spouse? You can pick the context. And the reason why that's very helpful is that, first of all, you're just asking for one thing, so it's
Yeah.
essentially the first thing that comes to the person's mind. And another good reason to ask that question is because sometimes we think that there are certain things that we think we are doing well, and it's very valuable, and I'm sure they are, but there's actually probably other things that are a lot more valuable that
Yeah.
we don't think is valuable. So you want to capitalize on that and be and grow in that self-awareness. And then the second question is like, hey, what is one thing that I can do differently in this coming month, 2 weeks, to give you more value, to be a better husband, be a better boyfriend, you name it. And the nice thing about that question is that you are asking for like, what is one thing I can do differently. So it's not like saying, hey, what is my weakness? What am I doing
Yeah.
wrong? And because the problem with that question is that if you ask for like weaknesses, areas of improvement, then sometimes people hold back because they don't want to hurt your feelings, or they don't
Sure.
think it's that big of a deal. But when you say like, what is something I can do differently, it kind of like takes away that negative connotation. So that's like one thing. But it's also another nice thing about that question is that when you say like, what is one thing I can do differently, it's going to be something very specific. And
Yeah.
sometimes it could be something really, really minor. But the thing about it is, especially like when it comes to leadership, average corporation is getting flatter and flatter. And so like when it
Mhm.
comes to promotions, it's very minor things. And so when you ask about those small things add up to a lot of things. But also like, when it comes to like personal relationships, sometimes people don't want to voice things, but it's important to them. But because they don't voice it, it's like, it's this kind of like elephant in the room, just keeps growing and growing. And so,
Yeah.
and another nice thing about asking for feedback regularly, the beautiful thing is that people know that you're gonna ask them about it. So like whenever you have your one-on-ones, or whenever you have that periodic conversation, they'll actually be expecting you to ask these questions, so they'll be better prepared. And that's what helps you to grow as a person. So feedback is super important. And one thing that I found that is tough is just like, when you ask for feedback, it could be very overwhelming. So asking those two simple questions really makes the process super simple and super actionable.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really good. I think something that the military cultures do well, and again, I think we have the ability to bring some value to people in this because I was an Air Force Academy grad and a fighter pilot. You're a West Point grad and an Army
Mm,
Ranger, and so there's a lot of things that are built into those cultures that people don't necessarily get um, exposure to.
mhm,
And so one of those is fighter pilot debriefs. I think
mm.
is an
Yeah,
amazing thing that we do. That,
I
and
I
again,
actually read a book about that,
yeah, there you
debrief
go.
too, and applied from my
So
colleague, and what's the next thing?
and but it's just kind of baked into the culture that we are striving for excellence. And when you sit down in the debrief, it doesn't matter if it's the youngest pilot in the squadron or the most experienced, that you basically sit down, you run through the tapes of what happened in that mission, and you debrief. And the best debriefs that I've seen, the guys who start, they are not afraid to call themselves out first of, here's what I messed up, because you never fly the perfect mission. And it just builds this culture of we are all working towards excellence, we all want to get better.
Yeah.
And therefore you can call out the colonel or the general who runs the base, who says, hey, you messed this up, like this was not the game plan,
Mhm.
this was invalid when you shot this missile or dropped this bomb. And and that's a good thing to do. And I sometimes I feel like in in church or ministry type life, uh we're afraid to strive for excellence, and we're afraid to have this sense of offending people. And there's a lot of probably psychoanalysis that gets involved with, right, because there's the faith, and there's a lot of dimensions that
Mhm.
go with that. However, if this is the most important job that we have on earth, is to lead other people to heaven, then we shouldn't be afraid to strive for excellence and to hold each other accountable. But like you said, feedback shouldn't be a personal. attack. It should be objective, or hey, just even simple debrief. How did that event go that we held? What about this group that we're starting? How's it going? What are things that we're doing well that people like, and what are things that we can improve upon? And I
Mhm.
think if you start from there, you'll start to build a culture of honesty and openness, and that's how people get better.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. So the kind of like the corporate buzzword is psychological safety, and so this is
Mm,
something I go over in my emotional intelligence workshops. And so what happens is that essentially psychological safety is trust at the team level. Trust is kind of like
mhm,
individual, and psychological safety is at a team level, because it's kind of like what you mentioned is that having those debriefs. The thing that some people miss sometimes is that they go straight to the feedback
mm,
without the relationship first, and that's where it goes wrong. It's
yeah,
like first you gotta be able to have that psychological safety, and then you can have that candor. And so that's one thing I encourage people to think about, is like, hey, yes, you want that, you want to be able people to be honest with each other, but like ask yourself, hey, what have I done as a leader to set up that psychological safety? Because those two questions that I've asked are very easy and simple, but like when you actually to be able to do it at the team level, people being honest about things that went wrong, being comfortable, bringing kind of like the elephants in the room. That's
yeah,
kind of like the PhD level, and it's a good thing. And I think that a lot of people understand the value of it, but what they're missing is that they don't do that prep work to establish that
mm.
psychological safety, go straight for the jugular, and it backfires, and then they're surprised what happened. Well, what happened is you didn't have you had the right intent, but you didn't have the psychological safety to be able to have those honest conversations.
Mhm. What would you say, so kinda zooming out to the 50,000-foot level in, our culture, or in our church right now, what are some leadership downfalls that you see? And I don't mean
Ooh.
like yeah, no, again,
You're
I
gonna
don't
get
mean
me
like
excommunicated over here.
no, I don't mean the Pope and the bishops,
Sure.
and because, I think a lot of people rag on them, and
Mhm.
if you've ever been in a leadership position, it is tough, and I think, most people are just doing the best they can, but I still think that we have a long way to go, and, I'll even pick on men, including myself in the church. It seems like in the past couple decades, men have kind of fallen off in these leadership roles, and we've seen women, praise God, who have kind of stepped up to keep the church afloat and
Mhm.
running. But so I don't know. Yeah, do you see anything in your, as you do your emotional
True.
intelligence workshops and things, that kind of connects to the church and laymen in the church?
Yeah, I mean, so let me kind of like a couple of things that come to my mind. So I think that like one thing that kind of like puts us at a disadvantage on with an average Catholic church is, like whenever mass is over, people just go separate ways. And I guess, and I see with like non-dimensional churches, like in the mass, whatever their service is, that's kind of like, and then the next step is that community aspect. And I think
Yeah.
so. Like one thing that works against us culturally is right, wrong, or indifferent. Like whenever mass is over, people go separate ways. So what I
Mhm.
always find really helpful to build the communities, have opportunities to connect, and it's kind of interesting because I was never I wasn't always at this level when it comes to my faith, and I was guilty of just going to the church and leaving. And for example, things like Knights of Columbus, like I used to think that these are just some dudes that wear these goofy outfits that have like terrible saber drills, because I think at the Air Force Academy you guys use saber too. It's like what are you
Yeah.
doing? That's not how you say it. But the interesting thing is, I'm actually a member of the Knights of Columbus, and man, they do so many wonderful things. And
Mhm.
so, and that's the sad thing is that I didn't know about it until I actually got invited into that community, and realized how many like amazing things that they're doing, as to raise funds, and also like volunteering and things like that. And so like 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 one thing that I think that it's not happening enough is having these opportunities to connect. And the
Yeah.
people who do connect, like Knights of Columbus, it would really help to do a better job of pulling other people into these amazing things, because it's like, again, like the more I learn about Knights of Columbus, it's like, wow, like how come like people are not aware of these things. And this is just like an example of many other organizations. And so I think that's like one thing that's a huge opportunity, is to bring people together, have these spaces to connect, because like when
Mm,
people connect, amazing things happen. And so that's like one thing that I, and and there's this kind of like perception that, the kind of the Flanders effect, that hey, being a church person is like, not cool. And
yeah.
it's, and again, that's like where having that opportunity to connect and see these people who are actually, faithful, but also like do amazing things. And actually a lot of these amazing things stem from their faith. And so like that's like one thing that I try to do myself, is be able to challenge myself too, because I'm not perfect either. Like after mass I want to, go home, I'm hungry, or whatnot. Is to, do things at the collective level, which is like joint organizations like Knights of Columbus, but also like at the personal level, like hey, if I see somebody, say hi, how are you doing, have a conversation, because little things like that add up to a lot of big things.
Mhm. There's two things that came to mind as you were talking. I think that there are things that pastors can do to help and kind of enable that culture, but then
Mhm.
definitely on the individual level. And so, one thing that our pastor did at our parish is out the kind of the main doors, there's a little bookshop, and he made that into like a Catholic coffee shop. And so when people walk out, there's immediately just this, an area to gather. Again, we live in
Yeah,
Phoenix, so like you can go outdoors most
yeah,
times during the year,
yeah,
but right, so people can grab things to drink, and there's just this social space that people can connect, and I'm so grateful for it.
yeah,
And we travel a lot, and so to when you go to other churches and there isn't just that physical area that people can,
yeah.
um, can connect. I think that's so sad. So again, that's not a spear towards
Mm.
pastors, maybe just an idea to think about of how are we building this culture that people can after mass connect and build friendships and grow the community together, and it's not just the fast food mass of get in get out.
Mhm.
And then the other thought is on the individual level, like you were saying, of people. I call it Catholic young adult hunting,
Yeah,
because when you're in the parish and you see some other like young families or whatever it is, um, it's even if you're not an extrovert, I think it's important to reach out to them, and sometimes like mass is over and they're like out the back, so you gotta like pack up the bag quickly and try to head them off before they get to the car, but all that to say, um, just to be intentional about introducing yourself, about saying, "Hey," getting to know people, and that culture just starts to build. And we did that here in Phoenix, and before you know it, there's two, three, four, five,
yeah,
six young families that are all they just hang out after mass, and the kids run around, and then you get to yeah, like that's where you build the relationship, and that's a piece of leadership that people don't realize that is super important, but just yeah, putting yourself out there and being intentional about building relationships, I think is super important.
yeah,
So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you don't look like some kind of a creep trying to ask people
yeah,
like, "What is this
yeah,
person
yeah, yeah.
doing?
It's
Go
a fun
home,
it's a
get lost. It's
it's
over."
it's a fine balance, and sometimes you got to just put yourself out there, and people might not be they might not resonate with that. But I find that a lot of the people who are making the effort to go to church, that if you are, just introduce yourself and ask about where they're from, and uh, yeah, I've never really had much of a bad um, experience just getting to know people, because there's a reason they're going to mass, and uh, so yeah, I found that it more often than not, it's not as awkward as you think it is.
Yeah, yeah.
So, um, what I think this, as we talk about leadership and things that people can do, what would you say to maybe husbands and fathers who are out there
Mm,
that that haven't gotten any of this training that we've gotten, and they
mhm.
get you know put into this position of really of leadership, of spiritual
Sure.
leadership and leadership in the household, and what would be your advice to say a young father who's trying to build a better marriage but
Mhm.
maybe doesn't know how, and trying to raise his kids Catholic and doesn't know, trying to figure that all out. What are some things that he could do?
Yeah, so it's again, it's kind of like hard to come up with like one simple answer, but The kind of the first thing comes to my mind is this quote by Theodore Roosevelt, which is like, "People don't care what you know until they know that you care." And I
Mhm.
think a lot of times, we, as men, fathers, brothers, husbands, we have the right intentions. Like we definitely like want people to do well, and we give them advice. But the problem is that, it's kind of, again, going that psychological safety. Like we don't invest enough and underestimate the power of the relationship. And so the best place to start whenever you want to improve your relationships is think about is like, hey, what can I do to connect with that person better? And a lot of times it's something as simple as just like listening to people, just getting curious. Especially like in our work settings, a lot of times we listen to respond. And a lot of times we don't actually listen. We already have a response, and we just want to like jam that response down to somebody else's throat. And I've been guilty of that. Even that right now, sometimes I catch myself doing that. But like one thing I would really really encourage people is to think about like, how can I make the person feel heard, make the person feel
Mhm.
loved, make the person feel cared for, because that is so powerful. Like it seems like a waste of time or a luxury, like in the short term, but in the long term it really like accelerates the relationship. So that's like one thing I would say. And then another big thing is praying with your spouse, praying with your family.
Ooh.
I mean, this is something that I've started with my wife from the get go, is praying the rosary every single night. And I just feel like this is something that really improved my relationship. And obviously, like I have, this is not theoretical. I was married before it was a train wreck, and so like, so for me, these things that I say is, this is not theoretical. I actually lived it. And so like one thing that I would really encourage men, and I get this because I grew up thinking that, praying is like awkward, it's for losers, and it's
Mhm.
not like a manly thing to do, because a man doesn't need to pray, men just make things happen. But I would really recommend those two things: is pray as a family, pray with your spouse, your kids, or whatnot, because it's like, hey, if you don't do it, how do you expect your children to do it? Think about it from the leadership by
Yeah.
example. So that's, pray as a family. And another one
Mhm.
is have some time, not so much to like get things done, but to connect. For example, and it's
Mhm.
funny because we know this from the corporate setting. I'm sure you guys do even in the Air Force is, you have the team building, and so
Yeah.
like we definitely get that from the corporate perspective. But it's funny how, and then I guess it kind of like really fits our nature, because women tend to be connectors, whereas like men tend to compartmentalize. And so a lot of times we think,
Mhm.
hey, this is work, but this is home, so I have to be different. But it's you can actually cross over these things. And it's amazing what happens when you translate the things that work in one setting to another setting. And so what,
Mhm.
what I really encourage men to do, and I know it's very counterintuitive, is to spend more time connecting, listening, and empathizing. And it's definitely harder especially this day and age with the phones, with the devices. I know it's a challenge, but I mean, I just see it time and again. Like when you spend the time, when you make the person feel heard, it just opens up so many possibilities.
Mhm. It's Man, it's so important. I think I hear a lot and a lot of questions that we get about how do you get your kids back to the faith, or how do you so many things, and I think it's a question of leadership. It's a problem of leadership where you can't force your kids to get to heaven or to pray or any
Mhm.
of these things. What you can do is you can lead them and your family, and the first way you do that is by example. So it's your prayer life. It's you setting the culture, and one of the things that we talk about with some of the couples that we coach is building a vision for your family. And it's what does that look like? Where do you want your family to go? And then as you make decisions, then you can start to frame those decisions in light of kind of your family vision or mission statement. And that comes down to praying too. I have a story of I took my men's group. We did Exodus 90. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
ever
Yeah,
done
yeah,
that,
I've
but
heard about it.
yeah,
Yeah,
for our listeners who don't know, it's 90 days worth of cold showers are the ones that
coach
everyone talks
Harrowden.
about. But yeah, right. So it's prayer, asceticism, which is acts of self denial, cold showers, no media or alcohol, and then fraternity, and then and the brothers together. So they did this spiritual boot camp, and then afterwards, we started to work on their faith as a family. And so I was like, okay, your homework this week is to pray with your spouses
Yeah, yeah.
each night. And so we got back the next week, and I was like, okay, how'd it go? Thinking like, yeah, we were praying. They would use the things that they learned in Exodus 90,
Mhm.
and the majority of them were like, yeah, I didn't really do
It's
this. It was
hard,
really
yeah.
awkward. It was tough. And I was like,
Awkward,
you
yeah.
dude, I was like, you dudes took cold showers for 90 days, and you
Mhm,
can't just look at your wife and say, how can I pray for you today?
mhm, mhm.
And so I gave him a hard time, but it's hard. It can be awkward. I do get that, but that's what we got to be as men, is courageous and step up. And sometimes
Yeah,
leadership is
yeah,
awkward, but you're
yeah,
doing it for the greater good. And so,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I promise, for the listeners out there,
Mhm,
it's not that hard to just ask your wife or your husband, how can I pray for you today? And
yeah,
then even if you just say one Hail Mary together, like,
mhm.
you're gonna be on track.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because we as men, like an average man, is into physical fitness, so we understand the concept. Hey, if I have a workout by myself, it's okay, but if I have a workout with a buddy, it's going to be a much better workout. Well,
Yeah.
same thing applies to prayer. Same thing applies to family, and
Mhm.
and I get it because I it definitely definitely, like, to me, like, I was definitely like one of those men. If they were, if somebody told me that my first marriage, I'd be like, what, you're weird, dude. but it's, I really feel like that's, if I had to point to one thing, like, why our marriage is so strong in spite of all these things that are happening, it's prayer. It really is.
Yeah.
And there's so many graces coming from that, and it's such a relief too, because a lot of times, especially as men, is like we feel like we have to have the answer to everything, and I think that stresses us out, especially like when we don't see a way. And then, there's so much power in surrendering these things to God, and it's so freeing, and I think it's just so underutilized, and so I just can't recommend it highly enough. And I know that, like, maybe like doing rosary every night might seem like a bridge too far, but yeah, it's something as simple as saying Our Father. For example, like one thing that, in addition to praying, another thing we started like doing every single morning, just blessing each other. Like, for example, like
Yeah.
my wife has some health issues, so I always pray for her, like not having had, says like, what I do is something really simple, like, hey, Lord, thank you for my amazing wife. I just pray that she has a good day, no headaches, no dizziness, no muscle tension, no sciatica, and I just pray that she has a productive day or restful day. Maybe add something unique to that day, and that right there takes like 30 seconds. And so the
Yeah.
beautiful thing, it's a prayer, and it kind of goes back to the thing that I mentioned before. Is like, people don't care what you know until they know that you care, and so that's like one simple way to demonstrate to the wife that, quite frankly, something that's inside of you. But when you pray and you bring up all these things that your wife is mentioning, then she feels heard. And it's like one simple thing to not only increase your prayer life, but also make your wife feel loved and supported.
Mhm. This has been so good, Mark. Thank you so much. Any other closing thoughts, or maybe things that you've seen in your executive coaching,
Mhm.
maybe trends in kind of the culture today that's a little different than before, or just overall tips for people out there who hoping to grow in leadership?
Yeah. So, like, what can I say when it comes to leadership? The kind of the ironic thing about leadership is that we always tend to focus on the other person, but really, like, the best way to influence situations is to focus on yourself. There's a saying that lead yourself first, lead by example. And so, what I would really encourage you to do is that whenever there's some kind of an, like, obstacle or something you're facing, or some kind of like emotion you're running from, ask yourself, is like, hey, what does it say about me? Well, what can I do about this situation? How can I learn from this? Just bring it to yourself. Look at it from the perspective of, like, hey, how can I solve this situation? Like, what does it say about me? And it definitely seems like very, very counterintuitive, but I just see time again that, there's this saying that if you run from the old emotions, they're going to own you. And so I
Mm,
just I just really encourage you that, when it comes to leadership, it's focus on yourself first. And when you learn from yourself, when you develop that self-awareness, that self-management, you're going to be in such a better position to be able to influence other people.
mhm. Mark, if our listeners want to connect with you or be
Mhm.
able to find out more about you, where can they get more information?
Yeah, sure. So just go to my website, which is my first name, last name.com. So it's MarekRudak.com. And also, like, if you like what I said, check out my book, I Love Driven Men. It's
Mhm.
available on Amazon. It's also Audible too. It's kind of a cool thing. Next, like in a few months, it's actually going to be released in Poland. So it's going to be translated to
Oh,
Polish.
wow,
So
awesome.
so that's a cool thing. And then, yeah, and then just go on my website. If your company is looking for like offsites or workshops, what I do, I put on these emotional intelligence workshops. People really enjoy them. They get a lot of out of it. So please check it out. Either for yourself or for your company, and I'll be more than happy to give you these tools that's going to make you a much more productive and much more profitable enterprise.
Awesome. Again, Mark, thank you so much for joining us. For our listeners, check out all the links in the description, and just know that we hope that these leadership tips will help you just grow in your faith, in your family, and in your business. To help set the world on fire and bring others to Christ. So, no, until next time, that we are praying for you all. Thank you so much, and God bless.
God bless, guys.